So hey guys, I am back again, and recently we realized that we do have a lot of examples in Python on how you can get started with the WorqHat APIs, but we do lack a number of examples on how you can actually get started with JavaScript. So what we'll do is we'll run through a simple HTML CSS JavaScript example where you can build a simple request response applications. We will cover much more complicated examples, scenarios like conversations and image generation and multimodality in upcoming videos. So let's get started with just handling simple requests and responses in JavaScript on how you work with WorqHat API. So in case you have not signed up for the WorqHat APIs, the link to do so is somewhere over here, up here. I'll add the YouTube video and the link over here. So once you have signed up, you will have the API key and you'll have to whitelist your domain. So we'll come to this a few minutes later. The documentation on how you can get started with building with the WorqHat APIs is always present at docs.worqhat.com. I'll add it in the description box below. Alright, so let's get started. Let's create a project scaffolding, a simple example around JavaScript and how we can get started with it. So what I'll do is I'll just speed up the part where we make the UI, and I'll make sure that I'll slow down when we are working out on the part where we are integrating how we send the requests and the responses. So let's get started. So this is what it looks like without any styling. So what I'll do is now I'll work on the styling part of it. So I'm done with designing how this entire UI should look like. Now what I can do is I can now get started with writing my script file. So what I'll do is I'll create a script.js file, scripts.js file. I will do a script.js file and I'll link the script.js file to my main application. So script source scripts.js. Right. So ideally now this should work. For just to test things out, let's do console.log testing if script file is working. Right. So I'll open the inspect console. Right, script file is working. I'll move this below. So yeah, script file is working. This works. Now we can start with writing our code. So what are we essentially doing over here? We'll add a prompt or add the question that we want to send over here. When we click on the send request, the send request button will send a fetch request to a server endpoint, and when the server endpoint receives it, processes your data and comes back with the response on how you can work with that response. So what I'll do is I'll go to my documentation at docs.worqhat.com, visit the textgen models, our latest textgen models icon v4, and I want to use a text only input. So that is what I want to work with. Now we have three different models: nano, large, alpha. Three of them have three different use cases. Nano is for fast processes but not so high on quality. Large models are super high quality, updated data and everything, but they tend to be a bit slow. Again, amazing mathematical accuracy as well. And alpha models are the upgraded versions of the nano models, which are trained on live data, so you can have up-to-date insights and knowledge. This is mostly used for real-time information such as news analysis, market research, or just staying informed on current updated. So if you're planning to build a general knowledge application, knowledge based application, tend to use the alpha models, right? So here's an example of how you can do it in JavaScript. But in order to get a detailed example, what you can do is you can scroll down and you will get to see the different samples, or you will get to see the different requests that you can send and the code snippets as well for the same. Now what we will do is we will create a function. Now that function will receive 3 parameters, or in our case it will just receive one parameter, and that is the prompt that we have. So let's get started with creating the function. So function send request, and it will receive the prompt as the input. Now what I can do is I can choose to type this out completely, or I can just directly copy this code base and paste it over here. Now what do I have here? So this defines the kind of input that I'm sending. Since I'm sending the input in the form of a JSON, so if you can notice, this is a JSON that I'm stringifying and sending. So what I'll do is I will be able to check things out. I'll be able to send it in the form of a JSON model. So how do we test this out? What we can do is also, I have received the prompt as an input, but I am sending here the prompt as a hard-coded element. So what I can do is I can add the prompt over here. So this will send the prompt as the input, the question that I've asked as the input to the model. What are the other parameters? This defines the kind of model that you want to use. This controls the temperature or the randomness. The higher the randomness level, the more it has a tendency to answer things on its own. It will not follow a particular format. The lower the randomness, the more guided the model tends to become. So you have more control over how the model answers, how it comes back with a response. Stream data, this is where we send each tokens as we generate it over and over time. So you get the token one by one. What is training data? Training, since we have a very unlimited context window, in case you have certain rules, certain guidelines that you would like the model to follow when you're working with it, you can add all of that stuff in training data, and the model will use that as a personality, or it will follow those instructions whenever it's sending a request. So that is what it works with. And response type as text, we support 2 kinds of responses. One is a JSON formatted response, where you can actually have it respond to you in particular JSON formats. I will come up with an example later on. And you can also have it respond in form of simple text-based outputs. So these are the 2 ways in which you can follow. Then you send a fetch request to the API endpoint, and you send these parameters, the request options that you have. You send this parameters as a post request, and then you wait for the response. Once I have the response, I will console.log those, and then I will be also catching for any errors if there are any. Now, 2 things that you need to keep in mind. I have not yet declared my API key. So I need to add my API key as well. So my headers dot append. Now I need to append authorization, and I need to pass the value. So what will be my value over here? Okay, I don't need to pass the value. Now what will be my value over here? When you go to your workspace, you might have created a workspace as I mentioned above, add in your links and everything. You go ahead to create a workspace, and you need to create a new API key. This is how you create a new API key. I have already created a lot of API keys, so I'll use one of these itself. So when I have an API key, I'll first test it out if my API key is working or not. So what I'll do is I'll go to authorization. I will just hit on the run option somewhere here. Right, I'll hit on the try it out button. I will send the API key as a token over here. This is just a checking endpoint that runs. So hit on the send button, wait a few seconds while we actually check whether this is working or not. And yes, this is working. This is a valid API endpoint that we have. So now what we can do is I'll go back to AI models text generation, and I will test stuff out here as well. So I'll paste the API token here, and I've just kept this input same. So I will try things. If it's working over here, then we move on to our code base. So wait a few seconds, and yes, it's working. So that's cool. And now what we can do is we can move ahead with the code base that we have. So I will add my authorization token as bearer, and then the value. So these are bearer tokens that we send. So make sure that you append bearer before you add the authorization token to the request. Now once you add the authorization token to request, it's time to test this out. So what I'll do is I'll call this manually and I'll send a request. What's your name? Just a testing things out. Now I save it. So if I look over here, I have a error and the error says invalid origin domain. Now we take security very seriously. We don't allow you to send requests because we do understand that there might be a case where API keys do get leaked. So you can always limit what origin domains you want to set while working with it. So in our case over here, my origin domain is localhost 63342. So I'll have to go over to my workspace. I don't have 63342 authorized over here. So I'll have to go ahead, add my domain and authorize my domain over here. Now when I click on whitelist my domain, I'll wait a few seconds while my domain gets whitelisted, and now my whitelisted domain gets visible, localhost 63342. Now I can go ahead, try things out again. I will refresh this once and see, here's the response. The response is here, WorqHat AI here, but you can call me WorqHat. So this is what the model works on. This is what you can work with. Now what we can do is let's connect it to the buttons and the inputs that we have. All right, so let's start with that. So now this function was essentially called randomly over here. So now I need to connect this function to be sent on click to this button. All right, I need to send this request on click to this button. So what I'll do is I have assigned a particular ID to this button. So I will listen for click requests over here. So document dot get element by ID, and my button is, I think, send request. Yes, my button is send request. Document dot get element by ID dot on click. I want to listen on click events. Now when I'm listening on click events, what I'll do is I will first try and log the output that's written over there. I'll first try and console.log my input prompt. So constant input prompt is equal to document dot get element by ID, and my element or the input prompt element is user input. This is my user input. So document dot get element by ID user input dot text content, or I can take it as the input value as well, or I can take it as the input value. So I can take it as text content, or I'll take it as the input value, right? So now what I'll do is I'll try to log this data. Console.log input prompt is input prompt. I think I'm doing a mistake over here. Right. This makes sense. It has to be arrow function. I missed out the part where we considered arrow functions. Right. So what I'll now do is I will type something over here. Hey, and I'll click on the send request button. Document get ID dot on click is not a function. So what I'll do is I'll change the way I call my on click event. Now that can be done using document dot get element by ID that add event listener. I'll add an event listener to this. Then I will do a click listener. I'll add a click listener to this, and then an arrow function that runs the input. So I think this should work. Right, I think this should work. Hi. Yep, see, so the input prompt is hi. This is how this thing works. So now I have finally hooked up the input box, the send request button, and I've completed writing my request function as well. So what I need to do is now I need to call my request function from here. So send request, and then I send the input prompt over here. And once I have the input prompt over here, now when I send the request, hey Alex, can you tell, oh sorry, I forgot to refresh it, I'm so sorry. Hey Alex, can you tell me about Pune? And I hit the send request button. The console.log is working, the input prompt is working, and it has actually answered over here. Now what I can do is I need to display the answer in this response box. Also, if you have noticed, this is getting answered in the form of markdowns. I want the model to answer in the form of HTML text. So what I can do here is I will change the training data, answer everything by starting with your name, and write the answer as a HTML code. HTML code output. No need to enclose it within backticks. Right, so this makes sense, and hopefully this will work. Now what I need to do is I need to display the response that I have over here. So if you look at my UI design that I had this response text where I wanted to add the data. Now what I'll do is I'll format the output as a JSON. I don't want to handle it in the form of a text, I'll handle it in the form of a JSON now. And if you can see it, it has changed the way the output comes. Now I don't want to handle all this conversation ID, the models and all of these things. What conversation ID essentially does is it creates some memory in the backend which helps you to keep a track of what you're working with. If you want to create a conversational history, we do that on our own, so you don't have to keep a track of it. So what you can do is I'll just console.log result.content. So this will just show the output that I want, and I want to display this content in that response text area that I have. So what I'll do is I'll connect this response text area to this so that it displays the content over here, right? So what I'll do is document dot get element by, I think I did not hit a dot, I hit a comma. Document dot get element by ID, and its response text dot inner HTML. No need to include in backticks of code base, just return the HTML code, nothing else. And response text dot inner HTML is equal to result dot content. I'll save this. Tell me about Agra. Let's see if this works now. I'll wait a few seconds. Right, so I have the output over here. It has displayed the output as well properly. You can format this the way you want to later on. That's completely up to you how you want to format stuff. But yes, the output is here. It has actually given back a very detailed response of what you can do if you talk to a tour guide. That is what they will help you out with. Now you can format this more to remove this backticks. I can do that as well. So what I can do is constant output is equal to result dot content. I'll make this a let function, not a constant, but I'll be modifying this. Now output is equal to output dot replace, and I'll replace backtick HTML with nothing, And I'll also, okay, this output is different. Output, right. And I'll also replace output with output.replace. Now this is just a hard-coded stuff that I do in order to make sure that it doesn't break a lot of code. I'll replace backtick with nothing again. So this is what we will do. Okay, I'll put a constant stuff. Now this is what we will do. So what it does is it replaces this and this. All right. So now I will try again. Tell me about Agra in one line. The smaller the content that you generate, the faster it becomes. So that is the rule of thumb, because we don't need to generate too much of tokens at any point of time. Now send request. Wait a few seconds, and yeah, I have the response. Now I'll replace the inner HTML over here with output. Right. Now tell me about Pune in line. Send. And here you go. It works. So I guess that's the end of this video. This is how you can get started with building your own projects using JavaScript. I'll push this code to our GitHub repo as well, and you can go ahead, fork the repo that you have started, get started with using this as an example, and please do reach out to us on our Discord channels or on our support channels in case you have any other issues. I'll add all the links to the GitHub repos, the Discord channels, and our emailing links in the description box below. And I can't wait to see what you all build with WorqHat AI. So till then, cheers, have a good day, happy building, all the best.